She cried in a bathroom stall alone, silent, forgotten. But what if that moment changed everything Claire Bennett had spent years fading into the background? A secretary no one noticed, a daughter holding the weight of a sick mother, a woman who gave up her dreams because life simply asked too much. Until the CEO of the company walked into the wrong bathroom and saw her. What made him stop? Why would a billionaire remember a sea inside, nestled in the tissue secretary's tears? And when does a quiet act of kindness become the beginning of something life-changing? This isn't a story about rescue. It's a story about recognition, about becoming visible in a world that prefers you quiet. It's about love that grows not through grand gestures, but through moments of silence, shared grief, and the courage to rise on your own terms. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever wondered if anyone would see you, this story was written for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Let's begin. There's something about crying in a bathroom stall that makes you feel even smaller than you already do. Claire Bennett had learned that the hard way. She hadn't meant to fall apart, not at work, not in the middle of a Thursday morning, and certainly not in the women's bathroom on the 26th floor of Pierce Holdings. But when the hospital called with the test results, and she heard the word recurrence, her knees had buckled. The stall had become her sanctuary, a cramped corner of cold tile and peeling paint where no one could see how far she had unraveled. The phone call had lasted 3 minutes. The silence that followed had been deafening. Claire sat on the toilet lid, fully clothed, coat still buttoned to her throat, though the radiator near the window hissed weakly with heat. Her hands trembled in her lap. She held a crumpled tissue already soaked through and pressed it against her lower lashes, trying to wipe away the damage before she had to return to her desk. But the tears came anyway, steady and quiet, slipping down her cheeks in delicate lines. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the cool, tiled wall. It was Chicago in January. After all, everything felt cold. But the chill of the wall didn't hurt. It grounded her. She breathed slowly, in and out, fighting for composure in a world that always demanded she be composed. From outside the stall, the building hummed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, heels tapping on linoleum. Somewhere down the hall, the copier gave a mechanical sigh. Claire closed her eyes. For just a few more seconds, she needed to not be anyone's assistant. She needed to not be the responsible daughter of a woman with stage 4 cancer. She needed to just exist, quietly, anonymously. Then footsteps, slow, measured, a pause, then the sound of the bathroom door opening. Claire stiffened. Wrong door, she thought immediately. This wasn't one of the usual women she passed in the break room or saw in the elevator. These steps were heavier, the shoes sharper. Men's dress shoes. A moment of confusion lingered, followed by the unmistakable hush of someone realizing their mistake. She held her breath. Maybe he would leave. But the footsteps didn't retreat. Instead, they stopped just outside her stall, not directly in front, but nearby, close enough to feel. There was no voice, no apology, just the sound of someone setting something gently on the marble sink counter, the faint rustle of fabric, then silence again, long, still, thoughtful. Claire's heart thudded in her chest. Who was he? And then he left, just like that. No words, no awkward laughter, no footsteps hurrying away in embarrassment. She waited 30 seconds more before unlocking the stall door. The bathroom was empty, the door slowly swinging shut behind him. On the counter sat a folded handkerchief, crisp white, fine linen, a single initial embroidered in navy thread at one corner. J. Pierce. Claire stared at it. She didn't move. The name prickled at her memory, but her thoughts were still clouded from the phone call, her eyes swollen, her mind foggy with grief and humiliation. She hesitated for a long while before reaching out and taking the handkerchief in both hands. It was warm where he'd held it, still held the faint scent of something expensive and understated sandalwood. Maybe, or something older, more private. She held it close to her chest and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was ruined. Her cheeks were blotchy. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks, someone running out of strength. She looked like herself. Claire rinsed her face in cold water, slowly patting it dry with paper towels. She folded the handkerchief and slipped it into her coat pocket. She didn't know what else to do with it. When she returned to her desk, the world resumed its rhythm without so much as a glance. Her inbox had filled. A post-it note from her supervisor waited at her keyboard, demanding she resend a document she'd already sent twice. No one noticed she'd been gone. No one noticed anything. At 11:03 a.m., she stepped into the elevator with two interns, a middle-aged sales rep, and a man in a tailored black overcoat. He didn't look up from his phone. She only saw his face clearly when the others stepped out at their floors, and it was just the two of them remaining. He turned then, looked at her, really looked, not with pity, not with recognition, exactly, but with something softer. His eyes, a pale gray blue, met hers with a quiet kind of acknowledgement. Then just as the elevator dinged at the lobby, he smiled, not broadly, just the barest curve of his lips. Like a secret passed between strangers. She stepped out. He didn't follow. It wasn't until she passed the receptionist that she saw his full name on the framed plaque in the main corridor. Jonathan Pierce, CEO. Her chest tightened. She walked all the way to the bus stop with her hands in her pockets, gripping the folded handkerchief like it might dissolve if she let go. The city was gray and sharp around her. The wind stung her eyes, but the warmth of that linen square pressed against her palm, grounding her in a way she couldn't explain. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, that small gesture, wordless, fleeting, unexpected, made her feel more visible than she had in years. She had been sitting at that desk for 5 years. Not once had anyone remembered her birthday. Claire Bennett didn't expect balloons or a cake. She didn't even expect a passing happy birthday from her supervisor or a card hastily signed by her coworkers. But a small part of her, even after all these years, still hoped for a flicker of recognition. It never came. The desk itself wasn't special standard, beige with a gray partition, and a drawer that stuck every time she tried to open it. A tiny succulent sat near the corner, struggling to survive under the fluorescent lights. The computer's keyboard had the letters worn thin on the most used keys. Every morning, at 7:45, Claire arrived 15 minutes before the rest of her floor. She turned on the coffee maker, restocked the paper tray, wiped down the communal copier. None of that was in her job description. She did it anyway. She was the executive assistant to the vice president of sales, a man whose name opened doors at conferences and whose temper closed them just as quickly. Claire knew how to navigate his moods, anticipate his needs, and rearrange his calendar with the agility of a seasoned air traffic controller. He never thanked her. At best, she was a fixture. At worst, she was invisible. Her inbox overflowed each day with messages that blurred together. Urgent, follow-up, re-meeting, reschedule, no greetings, no signatures, just demands. Claire responded to everyone, with full sentences and perfect grammar, her fingers moving fast and fluid across the keyboard. She edited reports no one noticed, cleaned up phrasing in memos before they went out, caught the errors that could have embarrassed a senior executive on a conference call. The credit never came. In the evenings, she rode the number 9 bus back to South Chicago, where the neighborhoods thinned out and the skyline gave way to quiet. She and her mother lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a worn-down complex with aging elevators and walls that remembered every conversation. The carpet was old, the windows drafty, but it was clean and safe, and more importantly, it was theirs. Her mother's illness had come in waves over the years. Some weeks were full of cautious optimism, good test results, laughter over dinner, plans for a trip they never took. Other weeks were marked by hospital visits, medication schedules taped to the fridge, and long nights listening to the beeping of medical equipment. Claire had learned to live between those extremes. Once, she had dreamed of managing projects, leading a team, maybe even starting her own consulting firm for office operations. She'd been top of her class in administrative studies, landed an internship at a boutique firm in her early 20s. The future had seemed clear, but life is rarely linear. When her mother relapsed a second time, Claire packed up the dream and traded it for something steadier, less brilliant, perhaps, but more necessary. So now, her days were full of other people's priorities. She organized their travel itineraries, booked their conference rooms, and packed their presentation folders. She knew who liked oat milk in their coffee, who preferred paper clips to staples, who scheduled fake meetings just to avoid talking to certain clients. She saw everything, and yet, no one truly saw her. Most of the time, Claire didn't mind. She took quiet pride in her precision, in the way her spreadsheets balanced to the cent, in how she could find any archived document in under 60 seconds. She found meaning in the small order she brought to a chaotic world. But some days like today, that sense of control felt paper thin. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, another request. She closed her eyes for a moment, let the ambient hum of the office wash over her. Phones ringing, the coffee machine sputtering, someone down the hall laughing too loud, the scent of reheated noodles drifting from the break room. Then a voice broke through, not directed at her, not even loud. Just a passing comment from a manager on the phone. Yeah, Claire will take care of it. She always does. As if she were part of the furniture, a reliable office supply, not a person. She opened her eyes. Her screen displayed a slide deck for an upcoming investor presentation, one she hadn't officially been asked to review, but which had landed in her inbox by accident. The formatting was inconsistent. Graph labels were unclear. One of the charts didn't even add up. She sighed. No one had caught it. If this went to the board, as is, it would reflect badly not on the person who made it, but likely on whoever printed it, her. So, she stayed late, fixed the alignment, corrected the numbers, rewrote a confusing paragraph. It wasn't in her job description. Again, she did it anyway. As she leaned over her desk, cross-checking one of the footnotes, she didn't realize anyone was watching. From the glass corridor beyond her cubicle, a tall man in a dark navy suit paused mid-step. Jonathan Pierce had been walking the floor, as he often did when he wanted to think through a problem. He moved quietly, unannounced, never flanked by assistants or an entourage. Just a legal pad in hand, a pen tucked behind one ear. His eyes fell on Claire. He didn't say anything, didn't even knock on the divider or clear his throat. Just stood there for a moment, watching the way she worked, focused, methodical, precise. Then, without a word, he walked on. Claire didn't see him, didn't know he had passed. That night, as she reached her apartment and set down her bag, she flipped open her personal email on her phone. A new message waited in her inbox. From Office of the CEO, Subject Internal Strategy Meeting. Document support, needed. She blinked, she read it again. They were asking her to assist in preparing background materials for the Executive Leadership Summit, scheduled the following week. Claire reread the request, her heart knocking quietly in her chest. This wasn't a routine assignment. It wasn't filtered down from someone above her. It had come directly from the CEO's office. She stared at the message in silence, unsure of how to feel. But somewhere deep inside, where the old dreams still lived small and quiet and waiting, something stirred. It was the first time someone above the 4th floor had said her name out loud. Claire sat in the far corner of the executive boardroom, her notebook resting on her lap, a blue pen poised but unused. The table stretched long and sleek before her polished walnut, with the company's crest carved faintly into its center. She'd passed this room 100 times before, the frosted glass always blocking her view. She'd never expected to sit behind its doors. Her name had been included in a short, clipped email. No greeting, no context. Just a calendar invite with the words, Executive Review Strategy Session. She'd read it 3 times to be sure it wasn't a mistake. Now, here she was. 20 minutes into a meeting she barely understood, surrounded by senior staff and division heads, all of them in tailored suits, all speaking in a language of revenue projections, market volatility, and brand positioning. Claire kept her eyes low and her thoughts quieter. She wasn't there to speak just to take notes, perhaps to assist if someone needed to cross-reference a slide. But then Jonathan Pierce said her name. Claire, he said simply. Not with surprise, not with hesitation, just clarity. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to call on her in that room. Heads turned, a few brows raised. She looked up, startled. I believe this chart here was updated recently, he continued, gesturing to a slide on the screen. Your team made the revisions. Claire hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. The previous figures were based on outdated regional metrics. I pulled the updated data from last quarter's reports and adjusted the growth assumptions accordingly. Her voice was steady, not loud, but firm. Jonathan studied her for a beat longer than necessary, then gave a slight nod. Well done. 3 syllables, but in them. Something shifted. The meeting moved on. The others spoke more carefully now, the room just a shade more aware of her presence. Claire returned to her notes, though her hand trembled slightly as she wrote. She hadn't planned those words. They'd simply been there, waiting to be spoken. By the time the meeting ended, most of the team filtered out in hushed clusters, already discussing next steps. Claire stood slowly, gathering her things. She didn't expect anything more, but as she turned to leave, she heard his voice again, low, close. Claire. She turned. Jonathan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, a slant of winter light cutting across his shoulder. Thank you, he said, simple, direct. It was not the kind of thank you that brushed off effort. It landed, and it lingered. Claire smiled, just a little. Of course. He nodded once, then turned back to his view of the city. She left the room quietly, footsteps soft on the thick carpet. In the elevator down, her reflection looked calmer than she felt. There was a curious stillness in her chest, as though her heart had paused mid-beat to listen more closely. Jonathan remained alone in the boardroom. The others had left quickly, perhaps too quickly. He walked back to the table and picked up the leather notebook he had brought in with him. Its pages were filled with meticulous notes, dates, sketches of workflows, ideas half-formed. He flipped to a blank page, wrote one line, Claire Bennett, detail-oriented, quiet precision, composure under pressure. He paused, then added, beneath it sees things others miss. And finally, smaller, in the corner, 26th floor, linen handkerchief. He didn't need to write more. He remembered her face that morning in the restroom, though she hadn't seen him clearly. The curve of her shoulders, the way she had held herself still against grief. He hadn't said anything then, because he hadn't wanted to embarrass her. But he'd remembered, not just because of the moment, but because of the way she'd folded the handkerchief before she left it on his desk 2 days later. Clean, pressed, as if to say I noticed too. Back at her desk, Claire settled into her chair, the morning's oddness still tingling at the edge of her skin. Her inbox awaited her, demanding as ever. A meeting request blinked in the corner. Paperwork needed scanning, but she didn't move right away. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring for a moment at the worn edge of her desk, the tiny scratch shaped like a question mark, the one she always ran her finger over when deep in thought. This was still the same chair, the same stale air and humming lights, the same half-dead succulent next to her monitor. And yet, something felt different. Someone had said her name. Not because they needed something, not as an afterthought, but because he saw her. For the first time in years, Claire felt real. They didn't talk much, but their silences were starting to mean something. It had become a quiet ritual. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Pierce Holdings, taking the long way to his office just to pass by the low cubicle on the 4th row, where Claire Bennett sat in her modest corner, typing away. He rarely stopped for long. Sometimes it was just a nod, sometimes a soft, good morning, once or twice, a comment about the weather. But those small gestures so ordinary, so brief, began to feel like anchors in Claire's otherwise invisible days. She never quite knew what to say back. And yet, she found herself pausing, brushing her hair behind her ear, smoothing her blouse, glancing up whenever she heard the familiar cadence of his steps. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't attraction, not in the dramatic, cinematic sense. It was recognition. She felt it in the way he looked at her, not through her, as if she were made of something worth noticing. One Wednesday afternoon, as she was printing logistics reports for the operations team, a new email pinged from Office of the CEO subject site, Visit, Evanston Branch, Administrative Support. At first, she thought it was another mistaken CC, but no, it was addressed directly to her. 2 hours later, she stood by the front entrance, coat folded over her arm, a notepad in hand. Jonathan appeared right on time, his black SUV idling at the curb. When she opened the passenger door, she found the same calm voice greeting her with an easy, "Thanks for coming." They didn't speak much on the drive out. The streets of Chicago rolled by, layered in gray and slush. Claire watched out the window, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her notebook. But the silence didn't press down. It rested between them like a soft, shared breath. Halfway to Evanston, he broke it. "She was a school teacher," he said, eyes still on the road. "My wife." Claire turned slightly toward him. She taught 3rd grade. Always said that was the year kids start deciding who they think they are. His mouth curved, bittersweet. She believed that if you caught them, then showed them enough kindness, it could change their path. Claire listened, quietly. She passed 5 years ago. Cancer. The kind that doesn't make promises. He didn't elaborate, didn't look for sympathy. He just let the words hang there, like leaves falling in slow motion. "I'm raising our daughter now. She's 15, thinks I'm the least cool person on the planet." A low chuckle followed, which, I suppose, means I'm doing it right. Claire smiled, gently. 15 is a tough age. He glanced sideways, eyes warm. "So, I've been told." There was a pause. Then, in a tone that felt more invitation than obligation, he asked. Claire hesitated. She hadn't spoken about her mother in more than headlines. People rarely wanted more than that, just the facts. "She lives with me," she began, voice quiet. "She's been in remission twice, but the cancer came back again last month. We're adjusting medications, trying to stay ahead of it. Some days are good, some not." Jonathan didn't interrupt. Claire continued, almost surprised at herself. "She taught me how to read with cookbooks. We didn't have many children's books growing up, so she used recipes. I thought simmer was a magic word until I was 10. Jonathan smiled. "It kind of is." Claire laughed, and something inside her loosened. The rest of the ride passed with moments like that, small exchanges, soft glances, silences that held more than they concealed. It wasn't personal in the romantic sense, but it was intimate in the way that people can share space without needing to fill it. At the Evanston office, Claire moved through the day with her usual quiet efficiency, reviewing supply needs, checking in with coordinators, making notes about budget gaps. She handled it all with care. Jonathan, from a distance, watched more than he spoke. Late in the afternoon, as they prepared to leave, he handed her a file folder with a few notes scribbled inside. Claire tucked it into her tote bag, not noticing until later that the linen handkerchief, the one she'd returned days ago, had slipped inside again. She found it that evening while unpacking, the same soft fabric, the same initials in navy thread, J. Pierce. Had he meant to return it? Had he even noticed? She held it for a long moment, then set it on her kitchen counter and filled the sink with warm water. She hand-washed it gently, pressing it between towels to dry, then ironed it flat, by habit, by instinct, not as a favor, but as a thank you. The next morning, before most of the office arrived, she slipped into the executive floor and placed the handkerchief on Jonathan's desk, folded, clean, crisp, and on top of it, a small square of paper. Written in her own neat cursive, "Office gossip is like smoke. It curls around the truth until it chokes the air." It started with a glance, A short, almost imperceptible moment between Claire and Jonathan in the hallway, seen through the blurred pane of a break room window. One of those moments that, in reality, meant nothing, just two people crossing paths, nodding politely. But meaning is never what matters in gossip. It's perception that fuels the fire. The whispers didn't come all at once. They crept in slowly, like cold seeping through the edges of a window left ajar. She's in meetings with the CEO now. Didn't she used to just manage the calendar for sales? I mean, she's not exactly senior material. Claire heard it all, never directly, never to her face. It came in the form of stopped conversations when she entered the break room, side eyes in the elevator, emails addressed to her with a little too much formality, as if people were suddenly unsure how close to stand. She tried to brush it off, kept her head down, did her job, but she felt it every pause, every glance, every breath held when she passed by. Then came Vanessa Clark. Vanessa wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. She was precise, calculated, one of those professionals who always wore the right expression, spoke with just enough softness to avoid being quoted, and smiled as she dismantled people's confidence. She approached Claire near the coffee machine one afternoon. No one else around. "Hey," Vanessa began, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I give you a little advice, just woman to woman?" Claire nodded, unsure. "You're doing great work. Seriously. But you know how it is around here, people talk. And it's not always fair, but appearances matter. Especially with someone like Mr. Pierce. He's visible, and proximity can be misread." Claire blinked. "I'm not." Vanessa held up a hand. I know, I'm just saying. If I were you, I'd keep some space, just until things quiet down." Then she walked away, leaving Claire with a bitter taste of something unspoken. Not an accusation, not quite a warning, but a message all the same. You're too close to something you don't belong near. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Her mother had gone to bed early, tired from treatment, and the apartment was silent. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, staring at the clock as if waiting for it to turn back time. She thought of the car ride to Evanston, the quiet understanding, the handkerchief, the note she had left. It had meant something, but now she wasn't sure what. The next morning, she made changes. She stopped walking to the executive floor, even when summoned. She declined 2 invitations to sit in on cross-departmental meetings, offering vague excuses about scheduling conflicts. She answered Jonathan's emails politely, professionally, always CCing at least one other person. She built a wall, brick by careful brick. Jonathan noticed. He didn't push, didn't call her in. But one afternoon, an envelope appeared on her desk. No sender, just her name, in his handwriting, inside a blank memo sheet from the executive stationery. And one sentence, in small, slanted script, just in case you need space to breathe. Jay. She read it 3 times, then folded it gently and slid it into the back pocket of her notebook. She didn't reply. That same week, HR announced a routine workplace review. Anonymous reports had surfaced, they said, regarding potential conflicts of interest and favoritism in departmental assignments. Claire's name wasn't mentioned publicly, but she didn't need it to be. The air changed. The silences around her grew heavier. Every interaction became measured. Colleagues who used to borrow her stapler without asking now knocked on the cubicle wall like strangers. The mailroom assistant who always shared a smile began to look past her. Claire, for the second time in her life, became invisible. But it didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like being erased. She used to find comfort in quiet until the quiet came from him. For weeks, silence had been her safe place, a refuge. It shielded her from the stares, the questions, the speculation that had turned her workplace into a minefield. But now, the quiet wasn't protecting her anymore. It was swallowing her. It wasn't that Jonathan ignored her. He simply stepped back. He no longer walked the long hallway past her desk. No more memos, no more nods through the glass. She saw him once in the lobby, his eyes flickering to hers for the briefest second before looking away. Not with coldness, not with shame, but with caution. As if he wanted to give her space, and maybe he did. But space, it turned out, was lonely. Claire tried to keep pace. She answered emails, filed reports, and made phone calls as though the floor beneath her wasn't cracking. She arrived early, stayed late, and smiled when it was expected. She acted as if nothing inside her was changing, but it was. Her mother's condition had taken a turn. More appointments, a new oncologist. The insurance wouldn't cover a newly recommended immunotherapy treatment. Claire had tried everything: calls to billing departments, applications for financial aid, prayers whispered while standing at the kitchen sink. Nothing moved fast enough. She began calculating her options in quiet corners on the bus, in the pharmacy line, on the office stairs, cutting expenses, selling her car, taking on weekend temp work. At some point, she stopped counting how many times she'd cried in the bathroom. This time was no different. It was a Friday afternoon, the office emptying early for some departmental retreat she hadn't been invited to. Claire sat on the cool tile of the same 26th floor restroom, knees pulled to her chest, a tissue pressed to her lips. Her eyes were swollen, her breath shallow. No footsteps came, no accidental visitor, no folded handkerchief. Just her. She stayed there for a while, long enough for the air to turn cold, long enough to remember who she used to be and the long list of things she was no longer. That evening, she returned to her desk, opened her email, and composed a message with no salutation and no closing. Subject: for my own peace. No body text, just the line. She attached her resignation, effective immediately. No goodbyes, no explanation, just the quiet kind of exit that leaves behind more questions than answers. She clicked send, then she powered down her computer, folded her coat over one arm, and walked through the lobby of Pierce Holdings for the last time. The receptionist didn't look up. The elevators chimed behind her. The city outside was heavy with winter. Jonathan didn't know. He was on a call when her message arrived. By the time he reached his inbox, her profile was already marked as inactive. It was the security guard downstairs, Jerry, a man who knew every name, every birthday, every breakup story of the building staff, who told him. "Hey, boss," Jerry said as Jonathan passed. "Your assistant Claire, right?" She turned in her badge, said she's not coming back. Jonathan stopped mid-step. For a moment, he didn't react. Then he gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else, and stepped outside. The wind caught his coat as he moved toward the corner. He slipped a hand into his inner pocket and pulled out something folded and worn. The linen handkerchief, still pressed, still clean. He turned it over in his fingers slowly. The embroidered letters facing outward: J. Pierce. He had kept it, carried it. Not because it meant anything to anyone else, but because it reminded him of the moment someone had trusted him with their most human self. And now, she was gone. He exhaled, quietly. Not regret, not sorrow. Just the ache of something unfinished. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 3rd, Claire's mother opened the mailbox at their apartment building. Among the bills and circulars was a slim, plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a folded statement from her pharmacy and a receipt. 3 months of medication, paid in full. There was no note, no signature, only a soft scent clinging to the paper. Something warm, familiar. Claire never mentioned it, but when she tucked the receipt into the back of her planner, her fingers brushed the folded edge of an old linen handkerchief. Jonathan Pierce was not a man who noticed when people left. But with Claire Bennett, silence had a name. She had been gone for 23 days. He didn't mark the calendar, didn't ask HR for updates, didn't so much as mention her name in meetings. But each morning, on his quiet walk from the lobby to the elevators, his eyes found her desk, still empty. The succulent plant near her monitor had wilted, its tiny green arms reaching toward the fluorescent lights like they were praying. The chair was pushed in neatly, no clutter, no trace. And yet, everything about that corner still whispered her presence. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. People leave, people move on. She had made a choice, and he had respected it. No calls, no messages, just space. But respect, it turned out, didn't make absence any easier to bear. Jonathan wasn't someone prone to reflection. His days were filled back-to-back meetings, quarterly reports, press interviews, board expectations. There was always another deal to close, another crisis to contain. But in the quiet in-betweens, the pause before a video call, the last light before leaving the office, he found himself opening the drawer in his office where he'd placed the folded linen handkerchief. It had been returned to him, cleaner than when he gave it. The fabric still held the faint scent of lavender, soft, thoughtful, exactly like her. Sometimes, without meaning to, he would take it out and run his fingers along the embroidered letters. J. Pierce. Once a monogram, now a memory. He hadn't realized how much of a rhythm her presence had become. Not just her work, though her absence made its mark there, too, but her steadiness, her way of moving through chaos without disrupting it, her silence, which never felt empty. Now, even the silence in his office felt too loud. 3 weeks passed. Then, one rainy Thursday, Jonathan left early. He didn't tell his assistant, didn't reschedule his meeting. He just picked up his coat, slid the handkerchief into his pocket, and took the elevator down alone. The city blurred outside the car window, gray with drizzle and headlights. His driver didn't ask where they were going, just followed the address Jonathan had typed himself into the GPS, South Chicago. He hadn't been there in years, not since a school fundraiser his late wife had organized for an underfunded art program. The streets looked the same tight rows of brick buildings, weather-worn signs, sidewalks uneven with age, quiet, but not lifeless. He checked the slip of paper he'd folded twice in his wallet, Claire's address. It had taken him 10 minutes to find it in the company records. Another 10 to convince himself it wasn't an intrusion. The apartment complex was modest, clean, surrounded by brittle trees shaking off the last of autumn. He walked up the steps slowly, unsure of what he'd say, unsure if he'd say anything at all. He knocked. It was her mother who answered. Dorothy Bennett was thinner than he expected, wrapped in a thick cardigan, with a scarf around her neck and eyes that had seen too many hospital rooms. But she stood with grace. Her gaze met his without question. "You must be Jonathan Pierce," she said, as if they'd already been introduced. Jonathan blinked. "Yes, I hope I'm not intruding." She gave a small smile. "You are, but not unwelcome." He exhaled, just a little. "Claire's not expecting me." "She's not home," Dorothy said gently. "Went to pick up groceries. Should be back soon." "I didn't come for a conversation," he said, looking down. "Just wanted to leave something." Dorothy nodded, stepped aside, gestured to the small table just inside the entryway. He placed the envelope there, white, unsealed. Inside, a handwritten letter and a single-page proposal, an invitation for Claire to join a new initiative under Pierce Holdings, a program offering flexible, paid fellowships for women returning to the workforce after caregiving roles. No obligations, no strings, just opportunity. He didn't expect anything in return, but as he turned to leave, Dorothy's voice stopped him. "You gave her something?" she said softly. Jonathan paused. "Excuse me." Dorothy stepped closer. Claire's always been the one holding things together. For me, for everyone. She forgot how to let herself want more. Jonathan didn't know what to say. She never talked much about work, but after she met you, she started leaving the dishes undone. Just sometimes. Dorothy smiled. "You made her believe something new was possible." Jonathan's throat tightened. "She didn't quit because of you," Dorothy added. "She quit because, for once, she realized she had a choice." He nodded, the weight of her words resting gently on his shoulders. "Will you tell her I came by?" he asked. Dorothy tilted her head. "No." He looked up. surprised. "I'll tell her nothing," she said with a quiet smile. "But I'll leave the envelope exactly where you put it." Jonathan left with rain gathering on his coat collar, the air thick with something softer than regret. Back in his car, he pulled the handkerchief from his pocket, folded, familiar, for the first time in days. He smiled. It wasn't the title that caught her attention. It was the phrase for women like you. Claire found the envelope on the hallway table just after returning from the corner market, 2 bags of produce in hand, her coat still damp from the misting rain. Her mother had said nothing, just pointed at the envelope like it had always been there. She carried it into the kitchen, placed it next to the fruit bowl, and stared at it for a long while before she dared to open it. The letter inside was handwritten, not typed, not branded, just pen to paper, in a style she recognized from quick notes and quiet memos. "Claire, not because you owe anyone, but because the world needs more of you. We're starting something new, quietly, carefully, for women like you who didn't leave the workforce because they failed, but because they were strong enough to show up for someone else. If you're interested, there's a place for you, not as a favor, as a foundation, no strings, no spotlight, just space, and a start. J." The letter didn't promise titles or power or glory. It didn't try to convince her. It simply invited her. She folded it slowly, as if preserving something fragile, and read it twice more before setting it down beside her tea. The steam curled between the words, soft and warm. Later that evening, she showed it to her mother. Dorothy adjusted her reading glasses, took her time, then looked up with a gaze that held something deeper than pride. "You've always put me first," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time you gave yourself a chance." Claire wanted to argue, to say it was too much, too sudden, too soon. But the truth was, something in her had already started shifting. She wasn't the same woman who had cried silently on cold tile floors. She wasn't invisible anymore, not even to herself. Still, when she called the number at the bottom of the letter and reached Jonathan's assistant, she made one thing clear. "If I'm going to be part of this," she said, voice calm but firm, "I want to start like everyone else. No corner office, no press release, no exceptions." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, understood. 2 weeks later, she arrived at the new location. It wasn't downtown. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a refurbished brick building on a quiet street in Bronzeville, tucked between a community center and a co-op bakery. The kind of place people walked to. The kind of place that felt like something was growing inside, not just running. She stepped out of the cab and took in the front entrance. Freshly painted doors, large windows, and above them, a new sign, not showy, not loud, just clean, metal lettering across warm wood. The Bennett Initiative, Women Who Start Again. Claire froze. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Her name up there, not buried in an email signature, not hidden on a name tag or badge, but up there. It wasn't a declaration. It was a recognition, not of status but of story. She blinked hard, felt the prick of tears, and took a step forward. Inside, the space was still being finalized, desks arranged, bookshelves half-stocked. But there was energy in the air, a quiet hum of something real taking shape. A few women were already seated at tables, reviewing welcome packets, chatting gently. Every face looked different, every path unique. Claire was handed a folder by a young woman in a cardigan. "Orientation starts at 9, she said kindly. "Coffee's fresh in the back. Make yourself at home." Claire nodded, taking the folder with both hands like it might slip away if she wasn't careful. She chose a seat near the window, set her bag down, then, slowly, deliberately, opened the folder. Inside were details of the program mentorship tracks, flexible scheduling, mental health support, resume rebuilding, and perhaps most moving of all, a section titled Courage to Return. On the last page, in familiar handwriting again, was a single sentence. "No more hiding." She smiled. Not a full, shining smile, just a quiet one, the kind that builds from within. Claire didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step, not as someone's assistant, not as a caregiver on the edge of burnout, but as herself. She was writing grant proposals by day and designing hope by night. Claire's world had shifted in small, deliberate motions. No applause, no grand speeches, just the steady rhythm of progress, clicking keys, highlighted spreadsheets, quietly confident presentations that left rooms a little more awake than when she'd entered. The Bennett initiative was still young, still rough in places, but it breathed, and so did she. She spent her mornings gathering stories from women who hadn't touched a resume in a decade, her afternoons building pathways, funding applications, mentorship pairings, transportation subsidies, on-site childcare pilots, her evenings, sometimes meetings, sometimes tea at home with her mother, sometimes just the stillness of knowing her hours mattered. What she didn't do, for 3 full weeks, was think too long about Jonathan Pierce. She hadn't seen him since the day the envelope arrived. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't pride. It was simply space. He had opened a door. She had walked through it. And now she was walking on her own. Until the Tuesday afternoon, she stood at the front of the community hall, laptop open, slides queued, pitching the initiative's first donor partnership to a group of skeptical venture philanthropists. The room was plain, folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, the soft hum of a faulty air vent overhead. But Claire stood like it was a stage, calm, grounded, not performing, presenting. She spoke of gaps, of silent sacrifices, of talent buried beneath unpaid caregiving and lost confidence. She told stories, not just numbers, and she made them believe, not because she demanded it, because she embodied it. Somewhere near the end, just as she walked the group through the final forecast, her voice steady despite her palms sweating beneath the table, she noticed a familiar figure in the back of the room, Jonathan. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just sat quietly, near the door, one leg crossed, a single hand resting on something pale in his lap. A folded handkerchief, the handkerchief, her breath caught, just for a second, but she didn't lose her place, didn't falter. She finished the presentation, took questions, smiled when the youngest donor called the initiative refreshingly unpolished. Claire called that authentically evolving. The room emptied slowly, people mingling near the coffee table, exchanging cards, checking calendars. Jonathan waited until she closed her laptop. He walked toward her without urgency. Without that executive stride he wore in boardrooms, just naturally. Like gravity drew him forward. He paused in front of her. The room had grown quieter. "I didn't come to watch your pitch," he said softly. Claire met his gaze, unsure whether to speak. He offered a faint smile. "I came to watch you rise." The words landed with a stillness she hadn't expected. No flattery, no agenda, just truth. Claire didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. Something settled in the space between them. Not closure, not promise, just a deep, quiet seeing. Later that evening, back in her apartment, she placed her laptop on the kitchen counter and let her coat fall from her shoulders. Her mother looked up from the couch. How was the meeting? Claire thought for a moment. It went well, she said, but that wasn't the part she carried with her. It was the moment she caught her reflection in the window, backlit by the golden wash of the kitchen light, and realized she looked beautiful. Not because her makeup had lasted, not because her hair held its shape, but because something inside her had taken root, had lit up. She looked beautiful because she felt real, and for the first time in a long time, Claire saw herself as someone worth noticing, not through someone else's eyes, but her own. She had been invisible in offices, but that night, under the golden lights, everyone saw her. The annual gala of Pierce Holdings was an opulent affair, held in the grand ballroom of the Lakeshore Heritage Hotel. It was all chandeliers, champagne, and the soft clinking of success. Claire had never imagined herself standing at the front of such a room. For years, She had been behind the scenes setting the chairs, checking the guest list, folding napkins no one noticed. But tonight, she was on the program, keynote speaker. She hadn't bought a new dress, there wasn't time, and there wasn't need. Instead, her mother had opened the old cedar chest at the foot of her bed and pulled out a navy blue gown Claire had worn to her college graduation. They worked on it together, adding a few hand-sewn stitches, letting out a seam, tucking in what needed to feel fresh again. It fit, not perfectly, but honestly. The room shimmered when she entered, not because of the gown, but because of her stillness. Claire moved like someone who had grown into herself, not overnight, not by accident, but by effort, by every quiet choice that said, "I deserve to take up space." Her palms still sweated as she waited behind the curtain. Her heart still raced. But when the MC said her name and the spotlight found her, Claire stepped forward, and she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. She spoke of time, how it moves forward with or without you. She spoke of women, how many had disappeared behind closed doors, folding laundry between job applications, holding hands in hospital rooms, becoming experts in endurance without ever getting credit. She didn't name herself, but she told her story. One line soft, unshaken, stayed with everyone who heard it. We don't need saving. We need seeing. In the audience, Jonathan sat at a round table near the stage. His daughter, Lila, now 16, sat beside him, hair curled, dressed simple, eyes attentive. He hadn't told her anything about Claire, just that she would be speaking. But when Claire began to talk, Lila leaned in, listened, and then looked sideways at her father. "She's different," she whispered. "You're different with her." Jonathan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was thick, and in that dimmed room of executives, donors, and curated elegance, a single tear traced its way down his cheek. When the speech ended, the applause came slowly, then stronger, then rising to a standing ovation, not led by obligation, but emotion. Claire didn't linger on stage. She offered a slight bow, a quiet thank you, and stepped down. She disappeared into the hallway behind the ballroom, heart pounding, unsure if she'd remember anything she said once the adrenaline wore off. And there, away from the lights, away from the clapping, stood Jonathan. He didn't speak right away, just met her gaze with something steady, something softer than words. Claire opened her mouth, closed it again. There was nothing to explain. Not anymore. Jonathan stepped forward and reached into the inside pocket of his suit. The handkerchief, but different. Still linen, still white. But now, beneath the familiar embroidery, J. Pierced there was one more line, stitched in a finer thread. "This time, it's yours." He held it out. No grand gesture, no speech. Claire looked at it, then at him. And instead of taking it immediately, she reached first for his hand. She didn't say yes, didn't say no, didn't say anything, but she didn't let go. She didn't want to be someone's next chapter. She wanted to be her own book. The cafe was small, quiet, wood-paneled, with soft jazz humming from a corner speaker. Claire chose it because it wasn't a place either of them had been before. Neutral ground, a table by the window, 2 mugs of coffee, and a conversation waiting to unfold. Jonathan arrived on time. No assistant, no driver, just him. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had stayed up rereading something important. Which, in fact, he had. Claire didn't stand to greet him. She just nodded as he sat across from her, and they both took a moment to settle into the space between them. No small talk, no pleasantries, just the quiet hum of understanding that sometimes comes after weeks of nothing being said. "I've been thinking," Claire began, her fingers wrapped around her mug, "about what it means to be seen, to be chosen." Jonathan nodded but didn't interrupt. "I spent a lot of years blending into the background. Not because I didn't want more, but because wanting meant risking, meant leaving people who needed me." She looked down. "I don't regret that, but I'm not sure I know how to be in the foreground without losing myself." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, hands resting flat on the table. "You're not in the foreground, Claire. You are the frame." She exhaled through a faint smile. "That's poetic. But it doesn't take away the fear." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." A beat passed. She looked at him. Really looked. "People talk," she said. "They always will. About favoritism, about intentions, about power. And we let them talk." Jonathan replied gently, "Because the truth doesn't need to be louder than the noise." Claire shook her head slowly. I don't want to be an extension of someone else's success. I've spent too much of my life being the assistant to, the caretaker of, the support behind." Jonathan pulled something from his coat pocket, neatly folded pages, crisp edges, with her name typed across the header. She stared at them. "What is that A transition plan?" he said. "For the Bennett initiative, full handoff, board approval pending. You'd be the executive director, with autonomy, with authority." Claire didn't touch the papers. "Why? Because you built it," he said. "And because I'm stepping back." She blinked. "You're leaving? No, just shifting. Fewer decisions, more listening. Lila's about to apply to colleges. I want to be home more, be present." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And because I don't want to love you from a position of power." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. Claire reached for the papers but didn't open them. She wasn't ready yet. That was okay. "I'm not sure what I want," she admitted. "You don't have to know today," he said. She looked at him again, and this time, something unspoken gave way inside her. A guard lowering, a breath released. She stood slowly, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around him. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because she could. His arms circled her with quiet reverence, no squeeze, no possessiveness, just warmth, shared gravity. When she stepped back, she was different. So was he. Later that evening, as she folded the transition plan into her tote bag, Claire sat with her mother on the couch, a blanket draped over both their knees. Dorothy didn't ask what had happened. She never did. But after a few minutes, she reached for Claire's hand and said, "You don't need to decide anything right now." Claire nodded, her fingers tightening slightly. "But," Dorothy added with a smile, "your heart already stepped forward. The rest of you will catch up when it's ready." Claire looked down at their hands, one older, one younger, both shaped by years of putting others first. This time, she was choosing to place her own name in the center of the page, and whatever came next, it would begin there. She looked into the mirror that morning and saw someone she hadn't seen in years herself, not the tired version with weary eyes and quiet resignation, not the invisible woman who blended into cubicles and hospital hallways, but Claire Bennett, whole, steady, still soft, but no longer small. The reflection wasn't flawless. There were faint lines around her mouth, new strands of silver near her temples, and a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not indifference, resilience. She brushed a crease from her blazer, adjusted the necklace her mother had given her, simple silver, a single knot, and exhaled. Today wasn't about her, and yet it was. Outside, the fall wind carried crisp air and the scent of turning leaves. The new Bennett Initiative office stood on the same street she'd walked 100 times as a teenager, past broken sidewalks, shuttered windows, and worn stoops where dreams rarely got further than the next streetlight. The building used to be an abandoned bank. Now it was painted soft gray, with tall glass windows that let the light in and let those passing by see in. That mattered. Inside, rows of folding chairs lined the modest main hall, filled with neighbors, old teachers, local business owners, women from all walks, many who had once believed they were past their prime, or never had a prime to begin with. Claire had made sure this wasn't just a ceremonial day. It was a beginning. She stood behind the podium, not nervous, just full of everything that had led her here, Every moment she'd sat invisible, every time she'd been overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood, every second of doubt, and every breath of clarity that had followed. Her eyes scanned the room. In the very back, almost hidden behind a support beam, stood Jonathan. He wasn't dressed to stand out. No suit, no attention, just presence. Claire met his eyes for one brief moment. She didn't smile, didn't wave, she just saw him, and let him see her. Then she turned back toward the audience. Her voice, once so quiet in crowded rooms, now filled the space without strain. When I was 16, she began. I walked past this building every day on my way to school. I used to look up at the broken windows and think, that's what forgotten looks like. A pause, not dramatic, just honest. I didn't know then that I would spend years feeling like one of those windows cracked, closed, left behind. She let the stillness sit. But I also didn't know. She continued, that broken things can be rebuilt, that forgotten corners of a city can shine again, and that a woman who once cried quietly in the back of a bathroom stall could one day speak in a room like this, not for applause, but for the women who are still waiting to be seen. Her final words weren't rehearsed. They had lived in her bones. Years ago. I cried in silence. Today. I speak for every woman who thought she was forgotten. Silence followed, not because the room didn't know how to react, but because it needed a moment to absorb what had just been given to it. Then came the applause. Not explosive, not showy, but full, real. A rising tide of acknowledgement. Claire stepped down from the podium. She made her way toward the back, not because she was trying to leave quickly, but because she knew someone was waiting. Jonathan stood just inside the exit hallway, hands tucked gently into his pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled from his coat one final gift, the handkerchief. The same one. But this time, there were no added stitches, no new lines of text, just the initials she already knew. He held it out, not as a gesture of goodbye or possession, but of return, of continuity, of care. Claire took it. This time, she didn't hand it back. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't ask what it meant. She simply wrapped her fingers around it and didn't let go of his hand. Together, they stepped outside into a golden late afternoon light that didn't promise perfection, but it promised something better. A beginning made of truth. No proposal, no diamonds, no dramatic kiss on a staircase. Just a woman and a man, walking side by side, quietly proud of the road behind them and ready for whatever path they'd walk next. Sometimes, the most powerful journeys begin not with bold steps, but with quiet ones, like a tear shed behind a closed door, or a whisper in a crowded room. Claire's story reminds us that healing doesn't always arrive in grand moments. Often, it begins when someone finally sees us not for what we do, but for who we are beneath the layers of silence, sacrifice, and survival. It teaches us that love isn't about rescue. It's about respect. That true strength doesn't always roar. It can be soft, steady, and born from years of carrying others. And most importantly, it reminds us it is never too late to start again. No matter your age, no matter what life has taken from you, you are not invisible. Your story still matters. So, take the hand offered in kindness. Speak, even if your voice trembles. And trust that the quiet light inside you still has the power to rise. Thank you for staying with us through this heartfelt journey. If Claire's story touched something in you, a memory, a quiet hope, or a piece of your own path, we invite you to help us share that light. Please like this video to let us know it mattered. Share it with someone who might need it today. And don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories, where every story is a soft place to land and a reminder that you are not alone. Until next time, take care of your heart. We'll be here, ready to tell the next story that finds you.